Welcome to this video lesson on the Parerga of Herakles. Heracles is the Greek version of the name Hercules, or Hercules as we call him. Parerga, erga comes from the Greek word for labores, labors, and par is from para. Essentially this means the side labors, the side tasks of Heracles. Okay, so here we go. Linus and Chiron. This is some background to the childhood of Heracles. So Heracles, or Hercules, had some good teachers. One famous teacher he had was Chiron the centaur. And Chiron, well, he taught a bunch of the different heroes. Others that might be famous, you might have heard of, would be Achilles and Jason. So he taught him, among other things, archery and just being a mighty hero kind of stuff. Linus was his music teacher, however, and Heracles was really good at virtually everything. In the first Olympic Games, he was said to have won all of the events, but one thing Hercules was not good at was, well, music. So he got really upset during one of his music lessons one time, and as we see here in the vase painting picture, he picked up the stool, or in some versions I think a lyre, and he just whacked Linus, his teacher, with it and killed him on the spot. Now this is the first example we have of Heracles kind of losing it. He would have these fits where he would just be overcome with emotion, and he would act out of character in a very weird way. So this is the first of these, but we'll see others throughout his life. This is one reason why epilepsy in the ancient world was called the Heraclean disease, because it was said that Hercules or Heracles had this disease where he would have these sort of nervous fits, and he would freak out and be out of control. Okay, here's another of the side labors. Now, this is while normally you see this going in the labors when he's going out towards the Amazons. So when he was on his way east to visit the land of the Amazons, he stops off in Troy. And Laomedon is the king of Troy at the time, and his daughter is Hesione. And according to the story, King Laomedon had put his daughter Hesione out on the beach at Troy as a sacrifice to the monster of Troy. This was a sea monster that was sent by Poseidon to ravage the coast of Troy and eat people. You might ask why? Well, the story goes that lying King Laomedon had lied to Apollo and Poseidon and said that he was going to pay them for building the walls of Troy. Zeus sent them to do this task as a kind of punishment when they had rebelled against him. Apollo and Poseidon had rebelled along with Hera. And so they were sent down there to serve, and he promised again to pay them, but when they were done building the walls of Troy, lying King Laomedon had lied about it, and he never paid Apollo and Poseidon. This is one reason why they go against the Trojans during the Trojan War, the famous Trojan War. But this is before that, and so again, Poseidon is already sending this sea monster. King Laomedon puts his daughter Hesione out on the beach for the sea monster to eat as a sacrifice. Heracles shows up and sees this beautiful young lady out on the beach, and he's like, okay, I'm this great hero, I can save her. So he goes to the king, he says, look, I can kill the sea monster and save your daughter. What you gonna give me? And lying King Laomedon says, oh, guess what? I have these wonderful horses, the horses of the sun god. They are crazy, fast, and strong. I will give you the horses if you save my daughter and kill the sea monster. So of course Heracles shoots the sea monster with his arrows, which are poisoned with the venom of the Hydra, kills it, and guess what? Laomedon, lying king, does not give him the horses. So then, as the story usually goes, he comes back a bit later with a small army, and I think just one ship of guys with him. Some of his buddies came with him, and just this one ship that's with him is able to take the entire city of Troy. In the later Trojan War, it's said that the Greek fleet was 1,000 ships, and it still took them 10 years. But Heracles just sort of shows up with his buddies, and they can do it in a day. That tells you how much greater Heracles is than the next generation of heroes, such as Achilles. Okay, so why did Heracles kill Linus? Well, he wasn't very good at music. Who was Chiron? He was the centaur who taught, among other things, archery to Heracles. He also taught Achilles, Jason, some other heroes. Why do we call the king of Troy lying Laomedon? Well, he tended to lie a lot. He lied to Poseidon and Apollo about paying them. He lied to Heracles about the horses. All right, then what was Heracles supposed to get for killing the sea monster that was going to eat Hesione? Well, as I just said, the horses of the sun god. Okay, special, magical, super awesome horses. All right, the pillars of Heracles, or pillars of Hercules. As you can see here, these are on either side of the strait between Spain and Morocco. This is the strait at the edge of the Mediterranean Sea as it enters into the Atlantic Ocean. So Gibraltar on the Spanish side and Jebel Musa, I guess, on the Moroccan side. And there are mountains that stretch out there on the land masses on either side of that strait. You can see one of the peaks there in the first picture. And then you see this memorial to Heracles there. These two peaks on either side of the strait are often called the Pillars of Hercules. And in Spain, there actually was a temple of Heracles, or Hercules, which had some famous pillars in it. But why do we call them this? Well, according to the myth, there are two versions of this. Either Heracles, when he came to this region, he wanted people to be able to trade and sail ships through there to the Atlantic, so he cut this open and created the two, peaks on either side by cutting through it and opening it up to the Atlantic. Or in the other version, giant sea monsters were coming in from the ocean and were troubling people in the Mediterranean, so he sort of built these mountains out on either side with his tremendous strength and so on. And so in that version, the point was to keep the big monsters out. So in either way, the Greek myths tell us that he made the Pillars of Hercules. All right, King Evander and Cacus. Now this story comes from while he is returning from getting the cattle of Geryon from far-off island of Erythea, which according to the myth is usually off the coast of Spain. So he comes back through Spain, through southern France, as it is in modern times, and then down through Italy. When he comes to the middle of Italy, where Rome would later be built, he is leading along these cattle, and he's really tired because he's been marching these things all over the countryside. And so he goes to sleep, and this monstrous man named Cacus, which means bad dude, bad guy in ancient Greek, Cacus, who is a fire-breathing son of Hephaestus, the fire god, comes and steals the cattle, and he leads them backwards into a cave. Now, the point of this is he's trying to trick Heracles to make him think the cattle are going the opposite direction. But of course, Heracles is not only strong but super smart, and he easily sees that they were drugged backwards. He follows the tracks backwards into the cave, sees that it's all shut up by a giant boulder. Cacus is inside, and he fights him, right? And he's breathing smoke and fire, and Heracles beats the heck out of him and kills him. So this is a simple kind of moralizing myth. Heracles versus the bad guy, right? Because that's what Cacus means, essentially. It means the bad guy. And then the king of the local town there, again, it's not Rome yet, because Rome wouldn't be built for hundreds of years, but the king of the town there, where it would later be Rome, was King Evander. Now, Evander, his name in ancient Greek, means good man. So again, we got the good man and the bad man. So good man, Evander, receives Heracles favorably into his home. He gives him food and lets him spend the night and all of this, and it's all wonderful. So good man, bad man, moralizing tale, good guy wins. Okay, where are the Pillars of Heracles? Between Spain and Morocco. What are they? Well, sort of the peaks on either side of that strait, right? The mountainous peaks on either side of the strait. Although there were some pillars in a famous temple of Heracles also in Spain. Whose son was Cacus, and what power did he gain from his father? Well, he was the son of Hephaestus, and of course he gained the fire-breathing power from his father, the fire god. What does King Evander's name mean? Well, good man. The ander part means man, and the L part in ancient Greek, which we get as EV, is good. Okay, the story of Antius and Busiris. So on his way back from getting the golden apples in the Garden of Hesperides, he's going through North Africa. And let's see, as he's coming through Libya, he comes across a king of Libya. This is kind of middle of North Africa. And the king's name is Antius. Antius was the son of Gaia. Gaia is Mother Earth. So because his mother was the earth, as long as he was touching the earth, he had invincible strength. So Antius, his deal was that he was an evil king. Whenever people came through his land, he challenged them to a wrestling match, and he always just crushed them and destroyed them. So Heracles shows up, and Antius is like, ha, this guy thinks he's cool. I'm going to kill him. So he challenges Heracles to a wrestling match. Heracles is like, dude, I'm just passing through your land. Let me go. Antius says, no, you've got to wrestle me. So they wrestle. Heracles thinking, it's going to be easy. Well, as soon as he locks with the guy, Antius is crushing him. And Heracles is freaking out like, this has never happened to me. I mean, I held the, heavens on my shoulders and all this, right? And he is losing it. He thinks he's going to lose, but he gets an idea. He lifts with all of his strength and pulls Antius off the ground, even though Antius is crushing him. Once Antius is off the ground, he loses the strength of his mother Gaia, and Heracles crushes him. End of one evil king. Keep going east through northern Africa. You come to, guess what? Egypt. And Busiris is the evil king there. And according to the story, the evil king Busiris in Egypt, whenever travelers came through his land, he would sacrifice them upon the altar. Of course, he'd pretend to receive them favorably first, and then he would have all his people gather around. They would grab them and sacrifice them. Human sacrifice, always a taboo for the Greeks here. And the Egyptians, well, they might have done some of this at times. Okay, so what happens? Well, typical procedure. He invites Heracles. He acts like he's, favorably, hosting him. He starts this religious ceremony, and then there are these Egyptians all around, and they attack Heracles and try to put him on the altar, kill him, but instead he kills all of them. And he kills Busiris too. And according to the story here, he makes Busiris's, I think his brother, into the next king. And this is a typical thing he does in a lot of these stories, is he gets rid of the evil king, like he did with Antius, and here with Busiris, and then he puts a good one in. In the story of Antius, some versions have him actually marrying Antius's wife, and then they produce a son together, and then that son goes on to be the good king of Libya. Okay, so at the end of all of the labors, right? What happens? Well, he kills a guy named Iphitus. And Iphitus was really a good guy, but Heracles flew into a fit. He lost it, kind of like we saw earlier. And this is also like when he lost it and killed his first wife, Megara, and his children. And he throws Iphitus off a high place, and he, of course, dies. So because Iphitus was a good guy, and there was no good reason for doing this at the time, Heracles has this impiety, this sin, as it were, that he needs to expiate. So he needs to sort of cure himself or purge himself of this problem. He goes to Apollo's oracle at Delphi, and Apollo refuses to tell him what he can do, so he steals the tripod, as we see here in this middle vase painting. That was an important sacrificial object in the temple, and eventually on, he does find out, Apollo does tell him, he finds out that, okay, if you go to Lydia, the queen of Lydia, her name is Omphale, you have to serve her for years, right? So he does go to Lydia, which is in modern-day Turkey, and strange story. So Omphale, sort of to, I guess, show her power as queen, she takes Heracles' club and his lion skin and wears them, pretends to sort of be him. And then Heracles has to dress up in her women's robes and do up his hair and all of this. I think in the picture he also maybe has a hand mirror in his hand. So it's kind of a ridiculous story, but apparently he spends years serving Queen Omphale dressed in women's clothing. And at the end of it, he is purged of his sin of having killed Iphitus. How did Heracles finally defeat Antius? Well, since Antius was the son of Gaia, Mother Earth, he lifted him off the ground. He lost his strength then. What did Busiris do with guests? Well, this evil king of Egypt would invite them and pretend to be friendly, and then he would kill them in a sacrifice. What did Heracles do when he got mad at Apollo's oracle? He stole the tripod right out of the sanctuary. What happened to Heracles and Lydia? Well, he had to switch with the queen, wear her women's clothing while she wore his lion skin and took his club. And he served that way for years. Okay, story of Achilles, Deianira, Nessus, and Iole. So at the end of his life, his last wife was named Deianira, and Deianira she was actually the sister of a famous hero named Meleager, whom Heracles had met as a ghost in the underworld. And Meleager said, hey, when you get back up there, you should go look up my sister, Deianira. She'd be a great woman to marry. So he did that. He married Deianira, and Heracles and Deianira one day were going along, and they were about to cross a river, and this centaur, again, they're part horse, part people. Chiron was a good centaur we mentioned earlier. A bad centaur named Nessus shows up. He grabs Deianira and runs across the river with her. He wants to have her to himself. This is typical of centaurs. A lot of times they drink too much and they run away with women, kidnap women, and do nasty things. So, of course, Heracles grabs his arrows and shoots him. Of course, they got the Hydra's venom in them, so he's dying. As he is dying, Nessus says to Deianira, hey, here's a little piece of cloth that has some of my blood on it. It is an aphrodisiac. When Heracles loses interest in you and goes for a younger woman, just send him this in a cloak, and it will magically make him love you again. And so at the end of this story, Heracles actually wins the possession of a woman named Iole through winning an archery contest. Yeah, women, nobody should win you for an archery contest, but that's how this myth goes. Very kind of misogynistic here. So poor Iole, a young teenage girl, very beautiful, has to go with Heracles. Now, he's not planning on doing anything with her himself, but he does want to marry her off to his oldest son. His oldest son, Hylas, is the oldest son of Deianira and Heracles. So that's his plan. But on his way back to see Deianira, she finds out that he's with this young, beautiful girl, Iole, and he thinks he's having an affair with her and has lost interest in her, in Deianira, rather. So Deianira sends him the poison cloak, and as soon as he puts it on, the Hydra poison gets into him, and Heracles is dying. But by this point, he is already mostly God. There's not much of the mortal left in him at this point. So the mortal part's in pain, but the immortal part won't let him die. So finally he builds a pyre which is a giant pile of wood that the dead are burned on. And of course, he's not dead yet. And so his plan is to burn away the mortal part of his body, and then he will become a god. So nobody will light the pyre for him. Finally, one guy named Poias lights the fire for him, and so Hercules gives him his bow. And the pyre burns away the mortal part. Then the mortal part goes as a ghost to the underworld, and the immortal part becomes a god up in Olympus. So there are actually two Heracleses. I should say also, I put Achelous' name on this slide. Achelous is a river god, and you can see him with this kind of snaky, fishy tail and the horns on his head as Heracles is wrestling him in this picture. The reason I put that in there is when Heracles went to marry Deianira, Achelous, the river god, wanted to marry her too, so they had to wrestle and fight for that. And according to some versions of that myth, when Heracles broke off the horn from Achelous, that was what made the cornucopia, the horn of plenty. There's another myth where that horn came from the goat Amalthea, who nursed Zeus when he was a baby. All right. Poias, father of Philoctetes, and Hebe. So again, here we see the pyre, the pile of wood, and Heracles on it. And again, it was Poias, who was the father of a later hero, Philoctetes, who went to the Trojan War. It was Poias who was the only one of Heracles' friends who would light the pyre. So Heracles gave him the bow and the arrows, which would later on be important because they needed them to be able to defeat the Trojans and win the Trojan War. Also, on the other picture on this slide, we see Heracles the god with his wife, Hebe. So this is his goddess wife. So the god Heracles is married to Hebe. Her name means youth, and she is the daughter of Hera and Zeus. And so they are married and sort of live happily ever after. As we can see here, it looks like everything is fine and dandy. Questions. Why did Heracles fight Achelous? Well, he fought this river god and ripped off his horn in order to win the chance to marry Deianira. Why was Deianira upset about Iole? Well, she thought that Iole was Heracles' new young flame, right? He was actually bringing her to be the wife of their son Hyllus. That's Hyllus. What did Poias do for Heracles, and what was his reward? He was the only friend of Heracles who would light the pyre, and his reward was he got to have the bow and arrows of Heracles. Who was Hebe? Daughter of Zeus and Hera, and goddess of youth, who became the wife of the god Hercules. Okay, well that concludes this video lesson. I hope you learned a few things about the Parerga of Herakles.